I was next to my father's casket when I heard my Aunt Maureen's voice, leaning in close and whispering, "He died disappointed." She didn't think I heard her, but I did. Caleb, her son and my cousin, added with a smirk, "She was always the one who let him down." I didn't turn or flinch, I just stared at the casket, holding my breath to keep from crying in front of them. The room filled with people in black, murmuring memories and condolences, but their voices faded as my heartbeat pounded in my ears. All I could think was, "You really said that at his funeral about me?" I was the only child he ever had. The one he told bedtime stories to, the girl who painted on the kitchen floor while he drank coffee and read the paper. Now I was reduced to a sentence, a failure in black heels. I almost walked out halfway there in my mind, but then Mr. Betrayal, Dad's attorney, tapped my shoulder and looked at me as if about to say something impossible. "There's something your father wanted you to have. He left very specific instructions." I didn't answer. I just stared at him, still pretending Maureen and Caleb's words hadn't stuck to me like oil. He didn't wait for a response and held out a small, worn wooden box, heavy at the edges, as though it had been handled often over the years. I took it because he wanted me to open this in front of everyone. My fingers froze on the lid. "In front of everyone?" I repeated, and he nodded. Suddenly, the room went quiet. Conversation stopped, heads turned, and people began to pay attention. Aunt Maureen narrowed her eyes, and Caleb tilted his head as if ready to laugh. I hadn't planned to speak at the funeral, didn't think anyone cared what I had to say, but now all eyes were on me. I looked down at the box. My name was carefully carved on top. Alar Quinn. For the first time since entering that room, I felt something other than shame. Curious, angry, afraid, hopeful. What did he leave me? Why now? Why here? The box felt like a challenge in my hands. I could have walked away, stuffed it in my purse, and opened it alone later. But deep down, I wanted them to hear what he had to say, especially those who thought they already knew how this story ended. So, I stepped forward, box in hand, and said, "This is from my father. The night I got the call, I was on my couch with a half-eaten microwave meal and my sketchbook on my lap. I hadn't drawn anything in 3 days, just flipping through lifeless pages. I wasn't expecting the phone to ring and let it go to voicemail. When I finally played the message, Mr. Betrayal's calm voice informed me that my father, Thomas Quinn, had passed away last night. No build-up, just like my dad would have done it. I sat there staring at the wall for a long time, unsure of what I felt. I wasn't crying or relieved, just blank, as if someone had turned off the sound in my chest. I didn't even call anyone. Who would I call? My mom passed when I was 20, and I wasn't close to anyone else in the family. Dad and I hadn't spoken in almost 2 years. The last thing he said to me was, "You're wasting your life," after I told him I quit the marketing job he helped me get. He stared at me like I'd spit on the floor when I said I wanted to go back to painting full-time and was thinking of showing again. His face shut down and he muttered, "You had potential once," before walking out. We never spoke again after that. Growing up, my dad was the kind of man people admired from afar. An Army veteran, a high school coach, the guy who volunteered at community fundraisers and taught kids to shake hands firmly and look others in. The eye. He was steady, proud, and respected. But at home, he was colder. Not cruel, just unreachable. My mom, Clara, brought warmth to our house, encouraging me to draw and cheering when I won art competitions. She died of breast cancer while I was in college. And after she was gone, everything with Dad got harder. He began seeing everything I did as weakness, grew frustrated that I didn't finish my MBA, and never understood why I turned down a corporate offer in New York to sell portraits at local art fairs. Aunt Mean, his older sister, never missed a chance to remind me that Caleb had a 6-figure job, a fiancé, and a condo in the city. She called me the dreamer when polite, and the disappointment when not. Caleb and I were never close. He had expensive tastes and liked being the smartest in the room, while I was the cousin who couldn't keep a real job. After the call, I packed a small bag and drove 5 hours to the town I swore I'd never return to. Every street corner held memories. The diner where I met Mom after school, the playground where I broke my arm, and the church where my parents renewed their vows before she got sick. When I arrived at the funeral home, the air was thick with polished wood and artificial lilies. People I hadn't seen in a decade hugged me tightly, saying things like, "He was so proud of you, and he talked about you all the time." I smiled and nodded, but knew they were lying. My father didn't talk about me, or if he did, it was only, in terms of who I used to be, a valedictorian, promising student, the girl accepted to 3 Ivy League schools who chose art school instead. I kept to myself that day, didn't speak during the service, and sat in the second row with my hands folded, trying to ignore the side glances from Moren and Caleb. When the priest called Dad a man of strong convictions, I wanted to laugh. He was more iron than man sometimes. He loved through actions, but never through words. At least not to me. After the service, at the reception, I stood by the coffee table, mostly alone, watching people share stories like confetti. That's when Moren leaned in, and Caleb delivered his little stab. I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure what I could say that would matter to them. But when the box came, everything began to shift. That was the moment I realized the story they thought they knew about me was only half the truth. The other half was inside that box, and I was finally ready to open it. As I stepped forward holding the box, the energy in the room shifted. Silence spread like smoke, curling around every head that turned toward me. People lowered their drinks, conversations died mid-sentence, and Aunt Moren's mouth pulled tight while Caleb folded his arms like he was settling in for a show he didn't believe in. I stood there with the box and felt everything I had been burying for years come rushing up into my chest. I remembered waiting for my dad to show up at my 8th grade art show, where I won first place for a watercolor of our backyard. He never came. The next morning, he asked if I had finished my algebra homework. I recalled standing in the living room my senior year with a full scholarship to an art academy in Chicago. He didn't say congratulations. He asked why I was choosing starving over stability. Now, I was before the same people who had watched my father praise Caleb's every move and looked at me like I was the family's open-ended question. I had grown used to being the unfinished sentence. Moren didn't hide her impatience as she crossed the room slowly, her heels clicking against the tile. She gave me a look I knew well, the one she wore when I walked into family dinners with chipped nail polish or mentioned another job I'd left. "If this is private, maybe it should stay that way," she said. I didn't answer. I wasn't doing this for her or for those pretending to care. I was doing it because, for once, my father had chosen me for something, and whatever was in that box, I needed to know why. I stepped up to the long table near the front of the room, still covered in framed photos and memorial candles, and placed the box beside a picture of Dad from his military days. I ran my fingers over the carved letters of my name one more time and looked out at the room. "This box was left for me," I said, "by my father. He asked that I open it here in front of all of you." Caleb let out a quiet breath that sounded like a laugh and glanced sideways at his mother. Moren didn't say a word, but her arms were tight across her chest, daring me to say something foolish to embarrass myself, to prove them right. I opened the box. Inside was a single sealed envelope, a small photo album, and a flash drive. The envelope had one word on the front written in my dad's steady handwriting: "Era." My hands trembled slightly as I opened the letter. I expected it to be cold, maybe a list of regrets or instructions, but the first line stopped me cold. "I never knew how to talk to you." There it was, honest, unpolished, not softened by ceremony. I kept reading. "You reminded me too much of your mother, brave in ways I wasn't, emotional in ways I didn't understand. You saw beauty where I saw risk. I thought I was protecting you by pushing you harder. I realize now I was just pushing you away." My throat tightened and the room faded around me. "I kept your art, all of it. Every sketch, every print, every handmade card you gave me. I told people they were done by a professional artist I was proud to know. I couldn't bring myself to admit you were mine, not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't think I deserved to be your father if I couldn't support you the way you needed." I blinked hard, trying not to lose control of my voice. "This isn't a goodbye, Ara. This is me finally saying the thing I should have said every single day. I see you. I've always seen you, and I'm proud." I finished reading and looked up. No one spoke. Not Moren, not Caleb, not the neighbors who used to smile politely when my name came up. The silence wasn't cruel anymore. It felt stunned, as if the story they had all agreed upon no longer made sense. Caleb shifted his weight and looked down at his shoes, and Mean didn't meet my eyes. Her arms slowly dropped to her sides. Mr. Bycombe stepped forward. "There's more," he said gently. "The flash drive." He walked over to the laptop connected to the projector screen, inserted the flash drive, and clicked. Images filled the screen. Photos of my drawings, labeled and dated, photos of me as a child with paint on my cheeks and markers in my hair, a short video clip of me presenting at my first gallery show. My dad's voice heard saying, "That's my daughter." I hadn't known he was there. He had been watching quietly, gathering proof of who I was even when he couldn't say it out loud. I thought he'd forgotten me, ignored me, but he hadn't. He'd been proud in silence. And now, he was gone, but his true voice was finally speaking. When the final image disappeared from the screen, the silence in the room remained heavy. No one moved. No one made eye contact. For once, even Morin had nothing to say. I stood there with the letter still in my hand, the weight of my father's words pressing into me like a brand. Every time he hadn't shown up, every time he looked at me with disappointment, every phone call he didn't return, it all felt different now, not erased, but rearranged. I had spent so long trying to earn his approval in the language he understood. Grades, jobs, degrees. I had let go of so much of myself just trying to meet a standard he never fully explained. Now, I knew he had been watching me through a different lens all along. He had seen the parts of me I thought he refused to acknowledge, had kept them protected, maybe even cherished. I sat down slowly in the nearest chair, letter still open. I wasn't sure what to do next. Part of me felt vindicated, but another part felt raw, like I had been cracked open and asked to stand in front of a room full of people while they looked inside. Mr. Bacon approached again, his voice quiet but purposeful. "Your father updated his will a few months before he passed," he said. "There's a section addressed specifically to you and one more request." A murmur passed through the room, too soft to follow. I looked up, waiting. Mean stiffened visibly, and Caleb glanced at her and then back at me. Bycombe opened a folder from his briefcase and read aloud. "Thomas Quinn leaves his entire collection of personal artwork, photography, and creative memorabilia, including several pieces from local artists, student showcases, and unknown talents, to his daughter, Aller Quinn, with one condition, that she use them to open a local gallery or community art space in her name." I didn't understand at first. I looked at Mr. Bacon. "A gallery?" I said. "He wanted me to open a gallery?" He nodded. He believed this town needed a space to celebrate the kind of work you create, and that you were the only one who could bring it to life. The words hit me like a current. My heart jumped. My chest ached. I had imagined leaving this town behind forever, had sworn never to return. But now my father, silent, stubborn, practical to the bone, had asked me to stay, not as an act of duty, but as a final expression of belief in who I really was. I looked across the room and saw Moren's sour expression. She didn't speak, but her disapproval was sharp and visible. I wasn't supposed to win. Not this way, not in front of everyone. Caleb's jaw tightened. I could see the question. In his eyes, why her? For the first time in years, I didn't shrink from the weight of it because I knew the answer. I stood again, steadier this time. "I used to think that silence meant disapproval," I said to the room, "that when my dad didn't show up or didn't say anything, it was because I had failed him." I paused, letting the words settle. But he was watching. He saved every piece of me I thought he threw away. And now he's asked me to do something with it. Not to prove anything, but because he believed in what I could build. I looked directly at Moren. "You don't have to believe it. You never did. That doesn't make it any less true." Then I turned to Caleb. "You don't have to like it either. I'm not who you are. I never was. But I don't have to be." Neither of them answered. They didn't need to. This wasn't about them anymore. I turned to Mr. Bacon. "I'll do it," I said. "I'll open the gallery." I didn't know how, didn't know what it would cost or how long it would take, but I knew I would figure it out because this was the first time I wasn't chasing approval or escaping judgment. I was building something that came from me, And for once, it would stand with my name on it. I left the funeral that day with the letter folded carefully in my bag and the flash drive in my pocket. The box stayed with me, a reminder that some stories don't end where they begin, that sometimes the things you believed were lost forever had simply been waiting to be handed back to you. A week after the funeral, I stood in my father's office for the first time in years. The door creaked when I opened it, like the room itself hadn't moved since he left. The air smelled like old paper and cedar. His desk sat exactly as I remembered. It, immaculate, disciplined, not a single item out of place. But when I opened the side filing cabinet, everything changed. Inside were folders, dozens of them labeled by year. The first one read, Age 6. I pulled it out and flipped it open. There it was, my first crayon drawing of a dog with 5 legs and a sun that looked more like a lemon. Below it was a note in my father's handwriting. It's a superhero dog who protects art. The next folder, Ara age 9, contained a flyer from my 3rd grade art show taped to the inside cover and a newspaper clipping of the winners with my name circled. He had highlighted the sentence where the reporter mentioned, a young girl with bold color instincts. My breath caught. I kept going. Age 12, 15, 18, my college portfolio, sketches I'd forgotten, business cards from my first freelance show, even rejection letters carefully preserved with his notes beside them. They'll regret this one. It wasn't just sentiment, it was proof. Proof that my father had been watching my life like it mattered. He hadn't just collected what I made. He had cataloged it, studied it, protected it. He had seen my work as something worth archiving, worth keeping safe. He never told me. Not once. I don't know if he thought it would soften me or distract me. Maybe he just didn't have the words. Maybe he believed he had to raise me to survive, not create. But in the end, this quiet room told me more about him than he ever did with his voice. He hadn't rejected who I was, he just didn't know how to celebrate it out loud. That moment broke something open in me. For years, I believed I was the daughter who failed, the one who left potential behind, the one who refused to follow the formula. But the truth was far more complicated. I hadn't let him down. I had simply taken a road he didn't know how, to travel with me. Now, he had given me the map. That same day, I drove to a small building near the town square. It used to be an old bakery, boarded up windows, a faded sign, a for lease notice curled behind glass. I stared at it from the sidewalk and could already see the future taking shape. White walls, hanging frames, wooden benches where kids could draw, a corner for community exhibits, a spotlight near the entrance for my mother's portrait, the one I painted from memory a year after she passed. I called the number on the sign that afternoon. 2 weeks later, the keys were mine. At first, I told no one. I spent quiet days sanding floors, cleaning windows, hauling in used furniture from estate sales. Some nights I cried alone on the paint-splattered floor, not from sadness, but from release. For the first time, I was building something without hiding it, without explaining it, without apologizing for it. Word started to spread. The town's newspaper reached out for an interview. They wanted to know why I came back, why I chose here. I said because the story never really left me. People from the community began donating supplies. A former student of my dad's volunteered to help with lighting, and my old art teacher sent boxes of unused canvases and oil sticks. Slowly, it began to feel real. Then opening day arrived. The front door creaked open just like his office had, and I stood inside wearing jeans and a paint-streaked button-down shirt, shaking hands, thanking strangers, and answering questions about the exhibits. At one point, I noticed Caleb walk in, alone, no Morin by his side. He didn't say much. He walked around the room, looking at each piece. When he reached the far wall, he stopped at the display titled What He Saved, filled with my childhood drawings mounted behind glass, each with a typed caption featuring my father's notes, his handwriting scanned, printed, and preserved. Caleb stared for a long time, then turned to me and said, "I didn't know about any of this." I nodded. Neither did I. He looked like he wanted to say more, but he didn't. He left without another word. I didn't need an apology. I had the truth now. The gallery stayed open late that night. A little girl came in with her mother and stared at one of my newer paintings, bright reds and purples in thick strokes. "Did you make this?" she asked. I smiled and replied, Yes. Can I paint like this someday too? I crouched down, looked her right in the eyes, and said, You already can. She smiled as if someone had just handed her the world. That night, as I locked up and stood alone in the quiet space, I realized what the box truly was. It wasn't just a secret, it was a seed. My father left me something to grow. 6 months after opening, the gallery was no longer quiet. Kids laughed during Saturday art workshops, retired teachers stopped in to donate supplies, high school students submitted their first works for public viewing, and parents came after work to enjoy a moment of color before heading home. Conversations happened every day about creativity, identity, and what it meant to be seen. I named the space Quinn House, not for myself, but for both of them. My father, who built the structure I fought against, and my mother, whose softness shaped the space I now lived in. The old bakery had transformed into something new and alive. The walls pulsed with energy, and the air carried the smell of oil paints and fresh coffee from the cafe next door. It didn't just look different. It felt like a place where stories could change. People started asking if I ever thought I'd come back. I told them no, because I didn't. I'd spent most of my adult life trying to outrun this town, believing it had decided who I was a long time ago. But what I didn't understand back then was that stories are allowed to evolve. Identities are allowed to be rewritten, even legacies. Sometimes people don't know how to love you the way you need. My father was one of those people, but that doesn't mean he didn't love me at all. It doesn't mean he wasn't trying. He just never learned how to say it until he found a different way. I used to think the silence between us was proof that I had failed him. Now I see it differently. It wasn't silence, it was him gathering the right words, the right gesture, the right moment. That box wasn't just a surprise, it was his way of finally speaking a language I could hear. I kept the letter framed in my office, hanging beside one of the first pieces I ever sold, a painting of the sky after rain. My dad's handwriting captured forever reads, I see you, I've always seen you. That sentence changed everything, not just for me, but for how I remember him. I no longer think of the last conversation we had as our ending. I think of the letter as the bridge, the one that connected the version of him I knew with the one I never got to meet until it was too late. Aunt Moren never came to the gallery. Caleb visited once more, quietly dropping off a small donation in my name. We didn't talk that time either. He just nodded, and I nodded back. That was enough. I didn't build the space to prove anyone wrong. I built it to show myself what was possible when I stopped waiting for permission. I had waited too long for validation, for someone to finally say I mattered. But that moment never really comes the way you expect. Sometimes it comes in a sealed box, handed to you by someone who never said the words out loud, but meant them all along. Sometimes it comes when you decide to stop hiding and start building. I've learned that grief doesn't end when someone is buried. Sometimes it starts when the silence lifts, when the truth finally steps into the light, when the things you thought were broken reveal themselves as unfinished. My father didn't get to see this place filled with people. He didn't get to see what I became once I stopped trying to be who he wanted. But in his own quiet way, he helped build it. He laid the foundation. He gave me the last piece I didn't know I needed. Now I wake up every day surrounded by what he saved. Not just the drawings or the letters, but the love buried inside them. The kind that doesn't shout, the kind that doesn't always arrive on time, but when it does, it stays. If you've ever felt invisible, forgotten, or dismissed, know this. You are allowed to become more than what they said you were. You are allowed to become someone they never imagined. Not for them, for you. I used to think I let my father down, but I was wrong. He saw me, and in the end, he gave me the space to become everything I already was. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of someone you've lost or a version of yourself you're still becoming, please take a moment to like the video and share it with someone who needs to hear that they're not alone. If you have a story of your own, I'd love to hear it in the comments. I share true stories like this because they help us feel a little more seen. If you want to hear more, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for being here.